Judge Chris, at the time of the 2003 trial, did you have any sense, or did you believe maybe at the beginning of the trial that he was mentally ill?
Before the trial started, when we were sort of in the jury selection process, I thought he might be mentally ill.
And now he has all these neurological problems. I'm looking at a picture of him now for my viewers. I'm going to say, you see that scar right there in front? That's where they put the shunt in. And you see that lump under his scalp? That's a plastic tube that runs from inside his brain, down the back of his neck, actually into his abdomen to drain cerebral spinal fluid. And that causes all sorts of bizarre behaviors. Was any of that evident back then?
That wasn't part of his health history back then. That's all things that have happened since.
And what about this business of him not being able to talk about having any sort of psychiatric problem, or he loses his inheritance? Is that factual, or is that just a rumor?
No, that was something that was discussed in the tapes when he was in Pennsylvania. He and his wife were recorded speaking, and they knew they were being recorded, and they were discussing the fact that she did not want him to use the insanity defense or to be examined by psychiatrists, because the trust that the Durst family had would have had a provision that would cut him out if he were ever found to be insane or incompetent in a court of law.
Anahita, I wanted to go to you because you said you doubted that, and here Judge Chris is saying that there was, and no one has questioned it since. What did you mean you doubt that?
I was saying maybe back then, but at this point in time, I'm not quite sure that's why they're not addressing the mental illness. And remember, Dr. Drew, ultimately it is up to the defendant himself to decide what defense is presented in the case. It could be that his attorneys are telling him we should go with some mental illness defense in this case, but he himself doesn't want that.
Well, because maybe remnants of this, or maybe his family had some weird bias that's why they put it in the will. Who knows? But Judge Chris, this case got deep under your skin, didn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about how it's affected your life?
Well, this is one of those most fascinating cases that we'll all ever experience. I mean, it was the most fascinating for me, but I think the entire country agrees with me, especially after seeing the Jinx. Robert himself is fascinating. The facts of the case are fascinating. This is just one where we could just talk about. I could talk about this for days. The facts of this are just beyond belief.
And you actually, beyond belief is true, and I think that's why we keep talking about it. You actually ran into him in 2005 after the trial, and he was sort of nonplussed. Is that correct? But then he left you a present.
Well, he was very startled to see me. He was very friendly, but he was quite startled to see me. But I didn't know he was violating his parole, and he probably thought that he was busted because I saw him.
And he was where he wasn't supposed to be, right? He was,
right.
Yeah. And then he left you a cat head?
Well, there was, after I testified against him for violating his parole, a severed cat head was left right in front of the sidewalk leading to my front door, perfectly severed, clean cut, no body fluid, no blood, left right there for me, as it laid out as if it were a message.
And was there anything about the way he vivisected this cat and the way he this is going to be a terrible question, but it just occurs to me, and the way he cut up his neighbor?
Yes, I mean, the medical examiner testified that the person who cut up Morse Black knew what they were doing, knew what tool to use for what bone and what muscle, and knew to use a different tool for the head versus the limbs versus the torso, and had done it before. That was the testimony, and that was clearly what you would surmise from looking at those pictures. Looking at this cat, it was taken to a vet. The vet said it was done by a human. Same thing, perfectly clean, not a body fluid, not a hair out of place. Very, very clean.
And so it wasn't as though some animal had torn the cat apart. And Samantha, he had dogs that disappeared mysteriously too, right?
Yes, that was actually brought up by his younger brother, Douglas, Dr. Drew, in an interview just this past January, where Douglas recalled the death of Robert's 7 Alaskan Malamute dogs in the months just before Durst's wife, Kathy, disappeared. He said, quote, "They all died, mysteriously, of different things within 6 months of his owning them, all of them named Igor. We don't know what happened to their bodies. In retrospect, I now believe he was practicing killing and disposing his wife with those dogs." That is his younger brother saying that.
I get a weird, Anahita, weird feeling when I hear this stuff. I mean, it's so stunning when you hear some of the the circumstances around this case. It doesn't make me any less clear on what's going on, or any more clear, because I don't have all the facts, and it's very frustrating. But what do you think about what we've heard so far?
Well, I had a question for the judge, if she's still with us.
She's there. She's with us. Go ahead.
Right. What do you attribute the acquittal to? Do you think it was just a matter of having a great defense team? Did you think that he himself was believable? Why do you think he was acquitted in that case?
I didn't think that he was believable, but I think that there were a couple of factors. I think the defense they did a great job. They were awesome, but I think it was more the fact that the state dropped the ball. I think that the prosecutors came in here there thinking they had to lay down simply because, which is what we call a case you can't lose, simply because of the gruesomeness and the bizarre facts, that the fact that he cut the body up. I think they thought that they had it won already. They took it for granted, and they didn't prepare. And then I have a suspicion that some of the jurors perhaps had motives other than looking for the truth and justice and looking at that verdict.
Wow. Wow.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, this is a very, very sensational, high-profile case. It was very clear we had media from all over the country there, and this was obviously one of those OJ-type cases where the jurors could actually get their own 15 minutes of fame when it was over, and you've got one of the richest persons in the country there as a defendant. And so I think perhaps not all, but some of them had hopes for gain when it was done.
And it's interesting to me that a lot of people that have come in contact with this guy end up quite paranoid about him. You carried a gun. His brother carries a gun. I mean, he makes you feel very unsettled, doesn't he?
Yes.